Hi, it's Hugh Foster on the bass here. Where to start with James Jamerson? What's to be said that hasn't already been said? Probably not a lot. I recently asked on Instagram for people to sum up the great man in their own words, so let's begin with a few of those. Andrew McKinney says, it all goes back to Jamerson. He gave birth to it all. Nadia says, some of the bounciest, unique and song complementing bass lines. Joe Chiari says, hugely influential, master of tone, pocket and note choice. Johnny Thwaite says, if you don't feel it, don't play it, which he mentioned was a quote of Jamerson, and I looked this up. So the full quote that Johnny was referencing there is from Jameson's son, James Jamerson Jr., who said, Dad always told me, you'll never be me and I'll never be you, so just be yourself and play what you feel. If you don't feel it, don't play it. Great bit of advice from a father to a son, and from any musician to another musician. Essentially what Junior is saying here is that his dad was one of a kind. He often played what came naturally to him, but he truly had a unique pioneering voice as an electric bass player. No one is going to sound exactly like him, not even his son, his own flesh and blood, who did struggle to escape his father's shadow at times. But let's start with something, quite straightforward. The gear. You'll need 1, a precision bass, or failing that, the neck pickup of a jazz, but ideally a precision bass, with the central placement of the split coil pickup, it's a huge part of the tone. You want that bass to be strung with flat wounds, ideally labella flat wounds, ideally as old as possible. So there's a famous Jamerson quote about this. According to Wikipedia, Jamerson used labella heavy gauge flat wounds, which were never replaced unless a string broke, and he didn't particularly take care of his instrument. There are lots of accounts saying that he had impossibly high action and a neck that was bowed out of all recognition. But he stated, the dirt keeps the funk. I was trying to figure out when I last changed the strings on this bass, and I couldn't quite put a date on it. I think I last changed them at least 11 years ago. So yeah, these are going to be pretty funky by now. The other key element, before we move on to anything else, is the foam under the strings at the bridge, which mutes the strings somewhat, resulting in a strong attack and a short decay. It doesn't have to be foam, by the way. I've previously used a rolled up towel. Anything soft that fits under the strings will do the trick. And finally, you don't have to play with one finger as he did, and he referred to his finger that kind of like roamed up and down the strings as the hook. But I have found it useful to figure out his approach to phrasing and dynamics. So today, I'll be breaking down 5 bass lines by the legendary session bassist James Jamerson, all from his days working at Motown. I've decided to start at the simplest or easiest of these bass lines, then it gets gradually more tough and complex. Get some foam under your strings and join me in exploring the genius of James Jamerson. So to kick us off today, let's break down Reach Out, I'll Be There by the Four Tops. This was written by the classic Motown team, Holland, Dozier and Holland, and the bass line is one of the more repetitive and prescriptive ones in this list. But that said, it's not without some unexpected details. As with all Jamerson bass lines, it employs plenty of chromatic passing notes, particularly in the intro and verse, and on that point, watch out for some very interesting open string choices in this one. It ticks all the boxes for a typical Jamerson bass line. It's driving, it's melodic and busy, but without getting in the way. So let's hear the intro first. 3, 4. Jamerson loves to use chromatic passing tones and really lead the ear to the next chord, anticipating the next chord in the sequence by setting the context of that chord. Here's that second bar again of the intro. Right? He goes E flat, E natural, and F, which leads to the B flat. Out of context, especially that E natural might sound a little bit odd, but that's one of these chromatic note choices. Chromatic meaning outside of the key of E flat minor. But the F natural, it's the 5th of B flat, and although the chord hasn't changed yet, he's anticipating the chord, giving it some solid reinforcement. It's really, simple stuff, but it's super effective when it comes to, memorable bass lines that really kind of support everything else that's going on. And moving into the verse, we've got a bit more chromatic movement at the end of the intro. So he's going down half steps from B flat, A natural, again another chromatic note, into A flat to kick us off in the verse. 3, 4. I'm choosing to play this a little higher up the fretboard to make that jump from the root, A flat, to the 5th, E flat, a little bit easier. For a lot of these bass lines, he does use open strings and lower positions on the fretboard, more often than not. But I feel like this is one where he's definitely a little bit higher up. This is the section where Jamerson decides to use one of the more discordant passing notes, an A natural, leading down to the A flat in the second bar of the phrase. This is one of those details I only noticed once I heard the isolated bass part. The great thing about a lot of this old Motown stuff is a lot of the isolated tracks are out there if you Google them. Remember, he only played with one finger in the right hand, the hook as he called it. So he would take any opportunity to rake down the strings for speed. And I think that's exactly what he's doing here. This will be a recurring theme in most of these bass lines. 3, 4. We're back in familiar territory here. The phrase that Jamerson plays under the initial B-flat chord is identical to the one in the intro. The chords are a little bit different here though. The E-flat phrase is a little more syncopated, but it's a nice bit of unison rhythm with both the melody and the harmony. Lovely bit of writing. I know the bass is relatively simple here, but I do love how it works with those haunting changes. Just to look at the harmony here, there's an E-flat major chord in the second bar. Remember, we're mostly in E-flat minor, but it's tempered really satisfyingly by the bass remaining on that B-flat sort of phrase, making it a sort of second inversion if you want to kind of get really theoretical. But yeah, it doesn't sound too jarring, but it's got that nice sort of, it's part of what makes it haunting, I think. Anyway, that's most of this song covered. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, we're on to the next song now. Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell's version of Ain't No Mountain High Enough, not to be confused with Diana Ross's version, on which Jamerson also played. This Motown classic, penned by husband and wife duo Ashford and Simpson, is arguably one of Jamerson's most well-known bass lines, next to What's Going On. And the verse, with its descending chromatic figure, is a little more prescriptive than the chorus and the bridge, where Jamerson has free roam to take the bass for a walk. Also, is there a song that's more recognisable from its opening chord? For me, hearing a B minor with an A in the bass is just intrinsically linked to Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Let's start from verse 2, which is broadly the same as verse 1. It's also half the length, but yeah, just get us to the chorus a little bit quicker and then straight into the bridge, right? 3, 4. Yeah, a little performance note. I'm choosing to play this starting on the 7th fret on the D string, but feel free to play it however it feels comfortable to you. Starting on the 2nd fret on the G would also work fine. I've got used to playing it up there, and for some reason it just sounds closer to what he played, but I'm happy to be proved wrong. The verse, it's quite simple once you get the hang of it. So it's a chromatic descending pattern till you get to that F sharp, the 4th fret, at which point you play a B, 4th fret on the G, jump down the octave, go to E, and then chromatic from F sharp back up to the starting point. But the syncopation, the rhythm is the key thing here, you know, particularly that second bar. You basically hit every 8th note, 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? But yeah, let's move on to the chorus. 3, 4. Again, yeah, play this where it feels comfortable to you. I'm choosing to play the open strings where possible. That's in keeping with, you know, the upright sort of adjacent bass techniques that Jamerson would have used. When I'm playing this one live, and I do play it live a lot, I do tend to play those high Gs on the 5th fret on the D string. But yeah, I thought, why not use the open string a little bit more? Again, whatever works for you. But yeah, talking of upright bass, I feel like this section is pretty close to a typical, you know, walking bass line, and the kind of things you would use in a walking bass line, at least in terms of note choices, not in terms of, you know, rhythm. But his constant movement, use of sort of linear lines, chromatic leading notes, the occasional arpeggio as well. Lots of leading notes here, chromatic leading notes, you know, leading up to that F sharp, up to that B. Got that nice A sharp there. A lot of that throughout this section. But yeah, let's move on to the bridge. 3, 4. This section is mostly about roots and fifths and subtle variations of phrases. It's 8th notes as the rhythm section builds for those first 4 bars. And, you know, root, 5th, root again, but up the octave. Once we're through that bit, there's a sort of root and 5th pattern that emphasizes 2 and in the beats of the bar. So 1, 2 and 3 and 4, 1, 2 and 3 and 4, and so on. And it's just a masterclass in, you know, establishing an idea, varying the pattern. And after this, we've modulated into a new key, but, you know, we can't spend forever on this song. It's time to move on. Come on, come on. Okay, time for What's Going On. And the infamous story behind this one is that Marvin Gaye, you know, it was like middle of the night or, you know, late at night, wanted Jamerson on this track, you know, he wasn't gonna have anyone else. Dragged him out of a local bar to record this bass line. And once they got to the studio, he was said to be so drunk that he couldn't sit or stand, so he apparently recorded it whilst lying on the floor. What's so great about it is that he almost never repeats himself. And it's a beautiful melodic part that weaves throughout the song, complementing the other instruments perfectly. You could say it's the ideal Jamerson bass line. His voice on the instrument, perfectly distilled. Here's the intro. 3, 4. So, how many ways can you play around an E major 7 chord? It's just great vocab just for that single purpose, right? So it's mostly roots, fifths, sixths, and a short bit of chromaticism in the final bar. Right, going from the 6th down to the 5th via the flat 6. And that signals the start of the verse really nicely. So let's move on to the verse. And for this breakdown, I'm starting on verse 2, just so that we get to the chorus a little quicker. I'm going to do the verse in 2 parts, the E major to C sharp minor 1 to 6 sequence, and then the end of the verse, which is like a 2-5 F sharp minor to B dominant sequence. Here's that first part. 3, 4. Compared to the intro, a little more 16th note syncopation going on, a few more skips. There's a few key rhythmic phrases that he keeps coming back to. So if we look at the second bar phrase, 3E and 4E and, that rhythmic phrase keeps coming back, you know, bar 4, 3E and 4E and 6. For note choices, he continues to use roots, fifths, sixths for the E major chord, but also the occasional linear line, so in that second bar, going up the scale, and the occasional passing tone. There's even one there as well, which, if you listen to the isolated bass, sounds like a G natural, because he's doing that, and he's muting it, but yeah, I can hear that really sort of like discordant G natural. When it comes to the C sharp minor 7 chord, he opts for more roots, fifths and sevenths. So the first time that happens, right? Just quickly, yeah, the last 4 bars of the verse, 3, 4. Starts to get a little bit tasty, right? Again, similar rhythms until he gets to that B dominant chord, which is usually some sort of suspended B11 or B13. Doesn't matter. Bass players just know it's a dominant, right? That's all he's thinking, right? That kind of climbing up is going to come back later on in the bridge, so we'll look at it in more detail there. So the pre-chorus continues that F sharp minor 7 and B dominant, 2, 5, that eventually resolves to 1, the E major in the chorus. And he's kind of just walking between the chords, either ascending, descending, slightly busier, more complex rhythms. Let's hear it on its own. 3, 4. The first time you go to the B, the second measure of this section, is a great sort of, you know, walking thing, you know, just moving down from the root and just using some nice chromaticism. You know you've got 4 beats, so just pick 4 notes that get you there in, you know, so that your last one is just the semitone above it. Great sort of like walking bassline kind of approach. The last 3 bars are really, really smart as well. Similar to what he did towards the end of the verse, but slightly different at the end. But yeah, let's move on to the chorus. 3, 4. So yeah, it's moving between chord 1 and chord 6, like the verse, but at double the harmonic tempo. That means it's changing every bar instead of changing every 2 bars like it was in the verse. It's similar phrases using the sort of linear ascending phrase that comes up in the verse, right? right? But it's kind of matching the intensity of the vocal melody at this point, and yeah, some tricky lines in there, especially towards the end, moving into the bridge. Speaking of which, let's break that down. 3, 4. So yeah, mostly 8th notes on a low E, some sort of 16th notes, 1 and 2 E, and push onto the E, the 5th. Then it's kind of alternating between the 5th and the high root with some sort of rhythmic variation, or you know, any one of these. Now the chord changes to B dominant. Let's have a look at some of the lines he's playing there. 3, 4. Oof. Did that bit extra slow because it's just, yeah, gets really busy towards the end. When it does change to this B dominant, he really does start to get his money's worth out of that chord. Mostly, I say mostly, he starts on the root, then goes up to the 3rd, to the 4th, usually some sort of chromatic thing or a ghosted thing up to the 5th, and then, you know, something like that can happen, and rhythmically it does get quite complex, but a lot of the rhythms, a lot of the pushes, you know, onto some sort of 16th note syncopation, they have been established by this point. So yeah, just really take it slow and you'll get it. Bassline number 4 now, Darling Dear by the Jackson 5. I've often seen this described as Jamerson's prettiest bassline, and I think I agree, but that doesn't mean it can't be an absolute monster. And yeah, we're definitely getting to the more complex, difficult end of the list now. So let's start with the intro, which itself can be broken into 3 parts. Let's hear the first part. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, pause there for a second. For those first 4 bars, that 16th note ascending line, the first thing you hear, and yeah, you start by going from D, chromatic up to an F, jumping down the octave, and then you go back the way you came. From F down to D, you do a slightly more complicated thing on that open D. Right, then the second time, I was just shortening the notes just to accent the rhythm there, but yeah. 16th note syncopation really starts to feature heavily at this point. So, next part of the intro, 3, 4. A little more static at this point. I say static, you're still moving quite a lot, but you know, it's a repeating kind of phrase. So it's moving every 2 bars between an F11 and again, and then you do the same ascending line, but then you land on B flat for the second part of it. And then the final part of this intro, 3, 4. So for these last 5 bars, we do take a brief trip to the very first phrase, right? And then we move down to C minor, right? Same rhythm on this one. And then every 2 beats. So that's B flat, up to C minor, up to D minor, then D flat 7, right? And rhythmically, he's doing a lot of 16th note syncopation. So for the most part, it's 1 and 2 E and 1 and 2 E and But then he gets to that D flat 7, where it changes slightly, 3 E and Now we're into the verse. We've got that chromatic line from the end of the intro. But let's hear the whole section broken down. I'll go from just that pick up there. 3, 4. There's too much to break down in this one video, so I'm just going to focus on a few key phrases really. Let's go from the first measure to the start of the third. Oof. I love what he does in that second measure, and knowing that it's played with one finger is key to the phrasing, you know, using hammer-ons to move up the fretboard. Right? And the third measure itself is classic Jamerson. Let's get into the chorus because there's some stuff in the chorus that does tie back to the verse as well. 3, 4. So much stuff going on in that section. Let's look at that opening phrase. Open strings, chromatic passing tones. Oof. He gets to explore up the fretboard a little bit more and just kind of jump back down to that open D whenever he needs it. I love the way he uses arpeggios, descending arpeggios particularly, in this section and also in the verse. There's a parallel, right? There's a phrase he plays under a C minor in the second measure of the chorus, right? Which is similar-ish to a phrase he plays in the last measure of the verse. Right? Both are different chords, but they're both the same approach. So that one I just played, last measure of the verse, it's a G minor that is the chord that he's playing under. So it's roots, but a high root, going down to the fifth, going down to the third, and eventually getting to the root. What he does in the second measure of the chorus, it's a similar sort of approach, yeah. High root, fifth, third, and eventually the root, but the low one again. To me, this approach indicates a clear line from typical walking bass line in a jazz setting. But you know, now we've got the addition of 16th note syncopation, so that's what really elevates these bass lines, these phrases. And another thing, and more general thing I want to mention as well, that there's a clear structure to each phrase in most Jamerson basslines. You could even call it a formula. I'm not calling him formulaic, but I'm saying there is a way that you can kind of pick apart each bassline and find a typical sort of approach each time. He always tends to highlight the root note on the first beat. Then beyond that, he gets busier using these kind of building blocks I've been talking about. So, you know, going to the third, going to the fifth, rhythmically getting a little more complex. If the chord changes on a downbeat, he might play a short note or a short phrase that leads to that chord, so just before that downbeat. So, for example, in that second measure of the chorus still, for the F and the A at the end of that measure. Those notes aren't included in a C minor chord, but we're setting the context for the next chord, B flat. And he does this so often, you know, to kind of give us a sense of context, to really give it a strong framework. Usually, yeah, it's the fifth of the next chord, a chromatic passing tone. And it's a good thing to bear in mind so that you've got some context and a little bit of stability and structure when you're learning these bass lines, and you can, you know, give yourself a bit of a chance. Finally, we've made it to bass line number 5. We arrive at For Once in My Life. This Stevie Wonder classic, and it is a classic. It's a great song. I love it, but it has brought me out in a cold sweat on gigs on more than one occasion. And to me, this bass line is Jamerson firing on all cylinders. Okay, let's kick straight into verse 1, which has more chords than the men's trousers section in a vintage shop. So sorry. D4. Oh, how did he improvise this? Okay, for me, the difficulty in this doesn't lie in any one phrase. They're all possible to play with some slow practice. It's just that the tricky thing is you're playing them in a sequence and you're trying to follow someone else's stream of consciousness, and he's being unpredictable and he's left booby traps everywhere. I mean, yeah, I do this on gigs and I kind of do a sort of approximation of this bass line, maybe quote one or two of these lines. But I mean, am I wrong in thinking this one's really tough? Maybe I am, I don't know. But the amount of rhythmic variation and 16th note syncopation in different places in the bar. The main pieces of advice I can offer to get through this, because it's an ordeal, it's not fun anymore. Play open strings at all opportunities. Learn the arpeggios for each of the chords in this. Even just root 3rd and 5th will help. There's that lovely phrase around the halfway point of this verse. F major. Just knowing all the F major kind of notes available to you there is really useful. Yeah, rhythmically this one is tough because he just keeps changing it, right? But just slow each phrase down until you've got it. That's literally the only way I got through this one. Okay, finally, and this is going to be the last thing that we break down today, verse 2. Here we go. 3, 4. Do you see what I mean about this bringing me out in a cold sweat? And as if verse 1 wasn't enough. The chords don't stay exactly the same in verse 2, so do watch out for that. I would suggest, as a sort of tip for learning this one, focus on a measure or two at a time, then expand that into a 4-bar phrase and so on. You know, the first 4 measures of this, really good for that. You know, even if you only get as far as that to begin with, and then see if you can get further. I love that bit. Just make it manageable. Around halfway, it starts to get really, really tough. So when it gets back to that F, F augmented and so on, that particular phrase really took me some time to get used to. Like on its own, yeah, like I'm reading it fine, but when it comes to actually playing it in the context of the rest of what else has happened before and what goes after it, it's just really, really tough. Finally, the last 2 bars before the tag, we get some consistency. And it's really great, this bit. But yeah, I'm using open strings wherever at all possible. So open D, open G, open D to get back down to that C, open A. Finally that tag, do it in F and then do it in G flat. And then you're into the instrumental, which is like the verses that have gone before, but now a semitone higher in G flat, one of the toughest keys to read in. And if you've got this book here, then have fun, but yeah, best of luck. That about wraps it up from me today. Thanks for watching and thanks for getting this far. If you have got this far, then maybe you're interested in downloading the extra stuff with this video on my Patreon. That includes the backing tracks that I've been playing along to and the cheat sheet PDFs that are available to download, and that's in tab and standard notation. And it's not the entire song, but it's a good, you know, primer to get you into, you know, starting your Jamerson journey, or maybe picking it up where you left off. Talking of the Patreon as well, thanks to the Patreon members for helping me decide on a shortlist for this video. I think this is possibly the toughest one to actually, you know, decide on 5 songs, just 5 to break down. If you've seen one of these videos before, I've done ones on Lewis Johnson, on Bernard Edwards, on Prince. In each of them, it's been tough to, you know, just decide on 5 to focus on, but I think this one will definitely deserve a sequel at some point. I think I've got the next 5 already written down somewhere. Do let me know if you have any other thoughts in the comments, and let me know how you get on with this, you know? And remember, I'll never be you, you'll never be me. If you don't feel it, don't play it. I've been Hugh Foster on the bass. I'll see you guys next time.